Suffering is part of doing ministry, and we will see that being a music minister does not mean that we won't go through such times of suffering, such times of difficulty. We love to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. It's not quite as easy to celebrate the suffering he went through before he rose. But the suffering had a purpose. It was part of God's plan. Like Jesus, God's plan for us can include suffering. It is hard to be happy about it. We don't usually have a big dinner party with family and friends to celebrate our suffering. But also, like Jesus, our suffering has a purpose. Your suffering as a music minister has a purpose. Your suffering as a minister of God has a purpose. It's up to us to make the most of it, to respond in obedience and submission to God. What is God speaking to you during this time of suffering as a minister? What is the word that God is putting in your heart for the next move of your ministry, for the next move of your passion to serve Him as a worshiper? Let me talk about suffering to learn obedience. In the book of Hebrews, chapter 5, verse 8, it says, even though Jesus was God's son, he learned obedience from the things he suffered. He learned. Okay? He learned. Is there something that you're learning from this time of suffering? Perhaps you're going through something as an individual, you're going through something as a ministry, you're going through something as a minister, as a worshiper. Is there something to pick out of that? Jesus undoubtedly suffered. Unfortunately, some people act like Jesus suffered so that we should never have to experience any kind of discomfort or suffering. Most Christian ministers, especially Christian music ministers, understand that the work Jesus did on the cross does not make us immune from suffering. But in the back of our minds, many of us think that we should get a pass on some personal suffering because we have devoted our lives to ministry. Okay? There are some people who think that they should not be going through a certain situation in their lives because they have committed to serve God. We say that we will probably have to go through more difficult times because we are in ministry. But we expect that suffering to be ministry difficulties. A part of our heart is disappointed when we experience personal sufferings. And this is a very common situation with worshipers, with music ministers, let me say. It's a common experience that music ministers go through, personal suffering. When they break down and they don't have anywhere to run to, when they break down and they don't have where to go. Okay? Perhaps our understanding that, like Jesus, we learn obedience through suffering. Struggles cause us to become more Christ-like and obedient to His call on our lives. Okay? You might have been disappointed in a certain place. You might have been disappointed in your ministry. But perhaps is it leading you to obey and listen to the voice of God, to where God wants you to be? Could you be in a moment where you found yourself, you're settling come what may, me, I'm settling here. And perhaps God is pushing you to the next level. And God has allowed suffering to come in a way of building you, in a way of opening up your eyes to look at His purpose over your life. Disappointments, hardships, and trials teach us to rely on God and His love in every circumstance, stretching our faith beyond what it had been able to stretch before. There are things that as Christian leaders, as Christian musicians, we want and desperately need. Suffering is difficult whenever it comes and in whatsoever form it takes. We are not always going to respond well. That's a fact. We shall not respond well, especially at its onset. But Jesus experienced the ultimate sacrifice, so we know He understands what we are going through. He is sympathetic towards us, and He walks with us along the difficult path. We can find strength in His companionship. You can find strength in the companionship of Christ. Not in the companionship of what you do, not in the companionship of your pastors, not in the companionship of your colleagues, but in the companionship of Christ. That's why you're going to find strength. Suffering is a proof that He is building us. He is building you into the kind of Christian leader, the kind of Christian musician He has called you to be. We want to be obedient like Christ. You need to be obedient like Christ. But are you ready to take up the challenge of learning to obey Him through even the suffering, through this time of the pandemic, through this time of suffering? I know many musicians have been affected, but are you willing to overlook this and see what is God preparing you for the next level of your life? Once this is done, what's the next chapter of your life as a Christian musician? Suffering is part of ministry, and God is making you. God is making you. God bless you.